Picture this. You're sitting around the Thanksgiving table, passing the mashed potatoes.
To your sister.
Yeah, to your sister, who also happens to be an FBI agent. Everyone's laughing, sharing stories.
Oh, wow.
But you've got a secret, a really big one.
Okay.
You're not just celebrating the holidays.
Right.
You're celebrating another successful mission as a spy for Cuba.
Oh, my gosh. That sounds like a very tense Thanksgiving dinner.
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost unbelievable. But that was the reality for Ana Montes,
Wow.
a top U.S. intelligence analyst who spied for Cuba for nearly 2 decades.
It's just incredible.
It's mind-boggling, right? And here's where it gets even more intriguing.
Okay.
Anna wasn't in it for the money.
Oh, really?
She was a true believer,
Huh.
convinced that America's policies were wrong and that she was on the right side of history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She was deeply disillusioned with U.S. foreign policy, particularly in Latin America, and saw Cuba as a force for good.
Yeah.
This wasn't about greed or personal gain. It was about ideology. And that makes her a particularly fascinating case for us to unpack today.
Absolutely. We've got a stack of research and articles here.
Okay.
All about Ana Montes, the Queen of Cuba, as she was known.
Right.
We'll be diving into her childhood,
Okay.
her transformation into a spy,
Right.
the intricate details of her double life,
Yeah.
and how she managed to evade detection for so long.
And the impact of her actions, the security lapses that allowed her to operate undetected,
Yeah.
and the lasting consequences for both her family and the intelligence community. It's a complex story with a lot to unpack, so let's dive right in.
Okay, let's start with Anna's childhood. We know she had a turbulent upbringing
Okay.
with an abusive father,
Oh.
who was, ironically, a military doctor turned psychotherapist, specializing in the impact of domineering parents on children.
Wow.
Could this have planted the seeds of her later disillusionment with authority?
It's certainly possible. Growing up in such an environment could foster a sense of rebellion and a distrust of traditional power structures. And it's interesting to note that even during her teenage years, Anna was known for her strong will and her tendency to challenge the status quo.
So even early on, there were signs of her independent thinking
Right.
and her willingness to stand up for what she believed in, even if it meant going against the grain.
Exactly.
But it was really in college while studying abroad in Spain that her socialist views solidified.
Yes. The political climate in Europe at that time, particularly the anti-American sentiment related to U.S. involvement in various conflicts, had a profound impact on her.
Right.
She was deeply affected by the struggles of leftist movements in Latin America and became increasingly critical of U.S. foreign policy.
And that's where she crossed paths with Marta, a fellow student who turned out to be a Cuban operative.
Wow.
This encounter proved to be a turning point, leading her down the path of espionage.
Marta recognized Anna's passion and her disillusionment, seeing in her a potential asset for Cuba. It wasn't long before Anna was fully committed to the cause, viewing Cuba as a beacon of hope against what she perceived as American imperialism.
So she went from protesting U.S. policies to actively working against them.
Right.
It's a pretty drastic shift. What motivated her to make that leap? Was it purely ideological, or were there other factors at play?
Well, according to the sources, Anna truly believed she was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
She saw it as a moral obligation to fight back against what she perceived as injustices perpetrated by the U.S. And she was willing to risk everything, her career, her freedom, even her family, for this belief.
It's hard to fathom that level of conviction,
Yeah.
especially when it leads you to betray your own country. But when she made the decision, how did she go from being a college student with strong opinions to a fully operational spy?
She received extensive training in Cuba, learning all the tricks of the trade, using encrypted radios, counter-surveillance techniques, dead drops, you name it. They even taught her how to control her blood pressure using her anal sphincter muscles to pass polygraph tests.
Wait, what? Seriously? They trained her to do that. That's incredible and a little bit terrifying to think about the lengths they went to prepare her.
It's a testament to their commitment and to her dedication.
Right.
They saw her as a valuable asset and they invested heavily in her training.
So equipped with these skills and fueled by her conviction, Anna returned to the U.S. ready to begin her double life. She landed a job at the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, where she quickly rose through the ranks, all while secretly feeding information to her Cuban handlers.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting. How did she manage to juggle these two worlds, the analyst at the DIA and the Cuban spy, for so long? Let's delve into the details of her double life. the meticulous tradecraft she employed, and the toll it took on her.
Because living a lie, constantly looking over your shoulder, it can't be easy. We'll unpack all of that in just a moment.
And don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying this deep dive.
Yeah.
We'll have a lot more fascinating details to uncover as we delve deeper into Ana Montez's story.
Okay, so Anna's back in the U.S. working at the DIA, seemingly a model employee.
Right.
But behind the scenes, she's living this double life,
Yeah.
carefully balancing her responsibilities as a top intelligence analyst
Mm-hmm.
with her secret activities as a Cuban spy. How did she manage to pull it off for so long?
Well, it was a delicate balancing act. She had to be incredibly organized and meticulous.
Right.
Think about it. She's reading classified documents,
Yeah.
attending high-level briefings,
Right.
all the while trying to figure out which pieces of information would be valuable to her Cuban handlers.
It's almost like she's playing a high-stakes game of chess.
Right.
Strategically choosing her moves.
Yeah.
Always thinking several steps ahead.
Exactly.
But she couldn't just waltz out of the DIA with a stack of classified documents, right?
No.
How did she actually get the information to Cuba?
Well, she employed a variety of techniques, all designed to avoid detection.
Okay.
Sometimes she'd memorize entire documents,
Oh, yeah.
later transcribing them from memory.
Wow.
Other times, she'd use coded messages hidden in plain sight. And for larger amounts of data, she'd rely on dead drops,
Right.
leaving information in prearranged locations for her handlers to retrieve.
It's like something out of a spy novel.
Yeah.
The secret codes, the clandestine meetings, the constant fear of exposure. It must have been incredibly stressful to live like that, always looking over her shoulder, wondering if today would be the day her double life unraveled.
Absolutely. The psychological toll must have been immense.
Yeah.
Imagine the compartmentalization required to maintain such a stark division between her two worlds.
Right.
And according to the sources, we have this constant pressure manifested in some unusual ways.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, Anna developed a reputation for being incredibly organized,
Okay.
almost to an obsessive degree.
Huh.
Her apartment was meticulously clean, everything in its place.
Oh, wow.
She was constantly washing her hands, straightening objects,
Okay.
seeking order in every aspect of her life.
I guess that makes sense in a way.
Yeah.
When so much of your life is shrouded in secrecy and chaos, maybe creating order in your immediate environment becomes a coping mechanism.
It's a fascinating insight into the psychological effects of espionage.
Yeah.
The hidden burdens that agents carry.
Right.
And speaking of burdens, there was one particular incident that put Anna in a real bind, the 1996 Brothers to the Rescue incident.
Yes. The downing of the civilian aircraft by Cuban fighter jets.
Right.
A major international incident, I remember well. The tensions between the U.S. and Cuba were incredibly high. And if I recall correctly, Anna was right in the thick of it, wasn't she?
She was. At the time, she was the DIA's top analyst on Cuba, so she was heavily involved in the U.S. response.
Uh-huh.
But here's the thing. While she was at the Pentagon helping to shape U.S. policy, she was also desperately trying to get information to her Cuban handlers.
Talk about a conflict of interest.
Right.
What kind of information was she trying to pass on, and how did she manage to do it while under such intense scrutiny?
Well, the exact details of what she shared are still classified. But we know she provided Cuba with insights into U.S. intelligence gathering methods, assessments of Cuban military capabilities,
Okay.
and potentially even information about U.S. plans for a possible military response.
Wow, that's huge. So while the U.S. government was scrambling to figure out how to respond, she was essentially tipping off the other side.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to think about the level of trust she must have had from both sides.
And the risks she was taking.
Yeah.
One wrong move, one slip up, and her entire double life would come crashing down. But she managed to navigate this incredibly tense situation without raising any serious red flags, at least not initially.
But eventually, even the most skilled spy can make a mistake. Right.
Right.
The cracks in her facade had to start showing sooner or later.
Of course.
How did the FBI finally catch on to her activities?
Well, it actually started with a seemingly unrelated investigation in Miami in 1998.
Okay.
The FBI was investigating a ring of Cuban spies operating in the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
and they uncovered evidence of a high-level mole within the U.S. government. They just didn't know who it was yet.
Right.
They codenamed this mole Agent S.
So they knew there was a mole, but they didn't have a face to put to the name. Enter Scott Carmichael, the counterintelligence agent at the DIA who discussed earlier.
Yeah.
He was tasked with finding Agent S and had a hunch that the mole might be closer than anyone thought.
Right. Carmichael was like a real-life Sherlock Holmes,
Yeah.
meticulous and relentless in his pursuit of the truth.
Right.
He started combing through the evidence,
Okay.
looking for connections for anything that might point him in the right direction.
It must have been like searching for a needle in a haystack.
It was.
Trying to identify one person among thousands of potential suspects. What was his breakthrough moment? When did he start to zero in on Anna?
It was a combination of things.
Okay.
First, he noticed that Anna had visited Guantanamo Bay during the same time frame that Agent S was known to be there.
Oh.
A coincidence, perhaps,
Yeah.
but it piqued his interest.
Okay.
Then he remembered that the FBI had intercepted a message from Cuban intelligence instructing Agent S to meet with someone with the initials WD.
And I'm guessing those initials rang a bell for Carmichael.
They did. He recalled that during the Brothers to the Rescue incident, Anna had worked closely with William Doherty, the head of the FBI's counterintelligence section. The initials matched.
Wow.
It was starting to look less like coincidence and more like a pattern.
Yeah. So he had his suspicions, but he needed concrete evidence to prove that Anna was Agent S. What happened next? Did they confront her right away?
Not quite. They needed to be careful. They didn't want to tip her off or risk her fleeing.
Right.
They had to gather enough evidence to build an airtight case.
Right. Yeah.
So they started watching her,
Okay.
monitoring her communications, her
Cool.
movements, everything.
It sounds like they were building a case fit for a spy thriller. The surveillance, the intercepted messages,
Right.
the slowly tightening net. But all the while, Anna was completely unaware that the walls were closing in around her right.
Exactly. She continued her work at the DIA, attending meetings, analyzing intelligence,
Yeah.
all the while secretly passing information to her Cuban handlers. She had no idea that she was under constant surveillance.
It's almost surreal to think about the double life she was leading, the web of deceit she had woven. But eventually, the FBI had to make their move. How did they finally bring her down? Was it a dramatic arrest, like in the movies?
It was actually quite subtle. Remember, Anna was meticulous, always careful not to raise suspicion.
Right.
So they had to play it smart.
Okay.
They used a seemingly mundane issue, a problem with one of her employees' time cards, to lure her into a trap. They asked her to go to the Inspector General's office to sort it out.
A time card issue? That's brilliant. Something so ordinary, so routine. She never suspected a thing, did she?
Not at all. When she arrived at the Inspector General's office, instead of finding an employee with time card issues, she found 2 FBI agents waiting for it.
I can only imagine the shock. The realization that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble.
It was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to minimize any risk of her escaping or destroying evidence. They simply informed her that she was under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage.
Just like that, her double life was over. And what about her family, especially her sister Lucy, the FBI agent? How did they react to this bombshell? And what about her family, especially her sister Lucy, the FBI agent? How did they react to this bombshell?
It's a truly heartbreaking scenario.
Yeah.
Here you have a family dedicated to upholding the law and protecting their country, only to discover that one of their own has been working against them for years.
Yeah.
The betrayal must have been devastating, especially for Lucy.
And we mentioned earlier that Lucy had actually been involved in the investigation that brought down the WASP network,
Right.
a group of Cuban spies in Miami.
Yeah.
To think that she was unknowingly working a case that would eventually lead back to her own sister, it's just mind-boggling.
It's a stark reminder that the world of espionage is full of twists and turns.
Yeah.
And that sometimes the truth can be found in the most unexpected places.
Absolutely.
The impact on Anna's family was profound.
Yeah.
They visited her in prison, struggling to comprehend how the person they loved could have betrayed them so deeply.
Those prison visits must have been incredibly difficult,
I imagine so.
filled with a mix of anger, confusion, and a longing for answers.
Mm-hmm.
Did Anna ever express any remorse for her actions, for the pain she caused her family?
According to our sources, Anna maintained that she was motivated by a belief that she was doing the right thing,
Okay.
that her actions were justified by her convictions.
All right.
Even in the face of serious consequences, she held on to her ideology.
It's a complex issue, isn't it?
It is.
On one hand, you have the damage she caused, the betrayal of her family and her country.
Right.
On the other hand, there's this unwavering belief that she was acting on principle, fighting for what she thought was right.
Exactly. It raises questions about the nature of conviction,
Yeah.
the limits of loyalty, and the gray areas that exist in the world of espionage. There are no easy answers here.
And it's important to note that Anna's actions had real-world consequences.
Absolutely. This isn't just a story about a spy and her double life.
Right.
There were victims. At least one Green Beret was killed in Nicaragua because of the intelligence she passed to Cuba.
Wow.
And the fates of many other American operatives she exposed remain unknown.
It's a sobering reminder that espionage isn't a game. It's a dangerous business with very real and often devastating consequences.
I completely agree.
So what happened to Anna after her arrest? Did she spend years in prison consumed by regret?
Well, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but was actually released early in January of this year.
Okay.
She's currently living a quiet life in Puerto Rico, seeking privacy after spending nearly 2 decades behind bars.
And what about her family? Have they been able to reconcile with her after all that's happened?
Well, reconciliation is a long and complicated process, especially in a case like this. The wounds run deep. While there have been attempts to rebuild relationships, the damage caused by Anna's betrayal continues to cast a shadow over the family.
It's a story that stays with you, full of intrigue, betrayal, and the enduring power of conviction. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about espionage and the people who engage in it.
It certainly does, and it reminds us that the world of intelligence is not just about secrets and technology. It's ultimately about human beings,
Right.
their motivations, and the choices they make, choices that can have far-reaching consequences.
Well, that was quite a deep dive into the complex and fascinating world of Ana Montes,
The Queen of Cuba.
the Queen of Cuba, a story of conviction, betrayal, and the enduring power of ideology.
It's a story that prompts us to consider the fine line between patriotism and dissent,
Yeah.
the allure of secrets and the human cost of espionage.
To all our listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this complex case. Was Ana Montes a traitor or a misguided idealist? Share your opinions on our social media channels, and let's keep the conversation going.
And if you found this deep dive thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe to the deep dive for more explorations into fascinating real-life mysteries. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.